Gentlemen and female gentlemen, we are doing a deep dive on why Africa is so poor. We are giving billions of dollars, trillions of dollars to Africa constantly, and for some reason, it's still dirt. It's still all dirt. I'm telling you, man, I don't understand. All right, it cost America $10 million to capture the El Presidente of Venezuela, but it's costing us trillions of dollars all the time from the entire Western world to pour money into Africa. All right, you got Mr. Beast going down there building wells, and it's still trash. It's still wilderness, barbaric trash. Now, I am not a racist. If I was, I might have a different analysis here. But as a non-racist that just wants to understand the lore, this is a lore video on why giving money to Africa makes it poor. All right, lock in, everybody. I'm excited to figure out why we shouldn't actually be spending our money giving it to Africans, but keeping it instead. It's gonna be great. Definitely subscribe, because here on Taku we do daily lore videos. Lore includes history now. That's the rules. I don't make them. That was a lie. I make them.
In the last 50 years, over $1.2 trillion of aid money has been poured into Africa.
All right.
More than the entire GDP
That's
of
a lot of
countries
money,
like
man.
Spain, Australia.
People really crying about like, I can't believe that Trump is wasting money on blank when they're starving children in Africa. Motherfucker, we've given them so much money. We gave them so much money. Think about all the leering centers they can open over there.
Or South Korea. When all of this began, just 11% of Africa lived in poverty. But by the 1990s, after floods of money and global campaigns, that number had actually increased to 66%.
We gave them trillions and we 6x'd their poverty. You see, man, listen, dude. You know, honestly, this liberal agenda, it's gotta go, bro. Why are we giving them infinite money, dude?
And today it stands at 38%, over 3 times higher than when the aid program started. In fact, back in the 1950s, the average Western European was just 5 times richer than the average African. Now the gap has more than doubled to 13 times. Today, over...
Probably has nothing to do with, like, culture, right? Probably. Do you get it, guys? Do you get how I was actually being sarcastic? They're spending all their money on sand? Shut the fuck up, chat. Bro, look, man, some cultures are just worse than others. That's my opinion. And some cultures are just dog shit.
Half of all Africans still live on less than $5.50 a day, and nearly 600 million people don't have access to electricity.
Well, you could, like, own Africa if you go in there with enough money. And not in, like, the slave way. I just mean, like, as, like, a real estate developer.
That's not to say this is an
But technically also in the slave way. Like, I'm not... Alright, moving on.
entirely recent phenomenon. Africa has always been poorer than the rest of the world, at least for the past 300 years. But for decades, the West's answer to this has been simple. The reason they're poor is because they don't have enough money, and to fix that, we simply just need to give them more. So that's exactly what's happened. Since the 1960s, the amount of aid going into Africa has increased.
Dog, they need to figure their shit out, man. They need to figure their shit out. Like, bro, they were a shithole before we gave them trillions, and they're even more of a shithole now. It's obviously not something that you could just give infinite money to and it fixes itself. Like, they need to figure shit out, man. Not trying to be controversial or anything. Don't want to be mean. But also, like, oh my god, dude, figure it out, bro. Also, how are they paying us back? Like, bro, why are we doing this as just as a freebie? Just as a freebie, bro. What are you giving us in return?
By nearly 120 times. It's easy to see why this is.
I love how parents like tell kids, we can't just throw money at you. We can't just give you everything you want. It'll end up being bad for your development. But let's give infinite money to Africa.
Such a popular strategy. It's simple. When we think of aid, we imagine schools being built, roads being paved, children being vaccinated. By and large, this is the strategy that transformed Europe and America into the powerhouses they are today.
Christian nations with biblical values.
But in Africa, it doesn't seem to work. The obvious answer...
Warlord shithole with Islamism and bullshit. You probably couldn't hear because I was coughing, but I actually was talking about how our nation is better than their nation because our culture is better than their culture. I was just trying to explain that in case you couldn't understand through the cough.
Answer that many people turn to is colonialism. Europe wrecked the continent, leaving economic systems so bad that the rise of dictators and corruption was inevitable. And while there's no denying that fleets of luxury cars and presidential jets, while around 30% of the continent lives without clean water, certainly doesn't help, there's more to the story. and a growing body of research is showing.
Bro, I'm so tired of this, like, actually colonialism is the problem of all the things. All the things that are bad happen because colonialism is a thing. All right, baby. All right. Estimates of average IQ across Africa vary significantly due to methodological debates, blah, blah, blah. All right. So, all right. Okay. All right. So, estimate around 68 to 70%. 68 to 70 average IQ. However, this guy disagrees and says, no, actually, it's 82. And this other analyses are like, no, it's 70 to 80. You're telling me colonialism dropped their average IQ by 30 points? Percent. Yeah, I said percent is a mistake because they're 70% normal people. Like, bro, you're not going to explain colonialism, all right? Maybe colonialism is the reason why they're not actually building modern empires and beautiful societies and civilizations. I don't know. Maybe it's because they're dumb. Fuck, I'm gonna get so canceled. I don't mean this in like a bad way, and I'm not even saying this in like a bad way, all right? Different cultures are different. Different people are different. Like, I don't know why we're like doing this, man. Like, I'm not trying to be controversial or anything, but you can't just blame colonialism.
That the money being given to Africa isn't just being wasted, it's actually making the continent poorer. But the truth is that decades of Western involvement might be the one thing holding Africa back. This is how aid laid the foundation for the biggest humanitarian failure of the modern era. For a time, foreign aid was seen as a kind of magic bullet, a surefire way to lift the continent of Africa out of extreme poverty. And to be fair, by the 1960s, there was a good reason to think this. The one major instant where it had been tried, it worked remarkably well. After World War II, Europe was left decimated, and all of this came with a massive geopolitical risk. Across Western Europe, communist parties were quickly gaining popularity, and there was a real risk that without a strong economy, Western Europe could turn to communism, or worse, be invaded by the Soviet Union. For the US, this would have been a disaster. So in 1947, the government announced one of the most ambitious economic programs in human history, the Marshall Plan. Between 1948 and 1952, the US pumped over $13 billion into Europe, roughly $160 billion in today's money. The idea was that by providing Europe with large amounts of cash,
This is the funniest thing in the world. It's like, if it works in Europe, why wouldn't it work in Africa? Because Europe is a civilization that's built on pretty much the same values as the United States, so the money that goes in would go to, for the most part, similar projects as the United States. All right, not to the horde of an angry warlord. I don't know, man. Maybe it's because the culture is similar or something. I don't know, man. Maybe it's because this is a culture that actually succeeded. European nations succeeded themselves. They got obliterated in a nasty war, but they succeeded. They had the infrastructure to succeed. Unlike, I don't know, shitholes in Africa. And again, I want nothing but love and peace and success for the African people. I want them to be able to build beautiful cities and glorious cultures and wonders of civilization and have technological marvels. But like, in Marvel, all right, the wokest franchise of all time, all right, in Marvel, in Wakanda, all right, they have like the Wakanda area with like the epic vibranium, which is the ultimate hacks mineral that can do fucking everything. They were still duking it out in fistfights. They were like beating the shit out of each other to become rulers. They were still walking around like half naked. Like in Wakanda. Technologically advanced Africa in Marvel, okay? All right, the best they could do was Wakanda. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk.
America could kickstart investment in the economy, and surprisingly, it worked. In the decade after the Marshall Plan, GDP per capita across the region grew by almost 35%. For the Western world, this was a massive success. But for America, it also represented a turning point. It realized that through aid, it could make countries rich, and in doing so, create both new trading partners and long-term allies in the fight against communism. So after the success of the Marshall Plan, the US looked to another continent, Africa. At the time, the continent was still reeling from centuries of colonialism. In 1960, the average income in sub-Saharan Africa was less than $150.
Dude, are we really going to make believe this was all just because of colonialism? Like, I'm really glad that we're getting the this perspective on why Africa's a shithole. But are we really going to expect that it was just colonialism? Like, yeah, colonialism was obviously a thing. I'm not denying it. I'm not saying that it wasn't atrocious for some people. But, like, you think the average income would have been, like, way higher without colonialism?
Dollars a year, and literacy rates were under 30%, with life expectancy hovering around 45
Bro,
years.
you're going to tell me that literacy rate being 30% is because of colonialism? Like, I'm sorry, man. Like, there's no way. There's no way, bro. What are you talking about? Get out of here.
Most of the continent lacked paved roads, electricity grids, or functioning governments.
Right.
But it also had something America wanted: natural resources.
That's right,
The
baby.
continent held massive reserves of oil, copper, diamonds, and rare minerals. With a rapidly growing population, it was seen as a future economic giant. If America could repeat the success of the Marshall Plan, it could unlock a new economic frontier and build a key ally in the process.
True.
So the money started flowing. In the 1960s, sub-Saharan Africa was receiving $500 million in aid every year. But by the 1990s, that number had increased 40 times to almost 20 billion. Africa quickly became the most aid-dependent region on Earth.
Yep.
And by the 90s, aid money made up over 60% of government budgets in countries like Uganda, Mali, and Burkina Faso.
The good news is they're sending all their people from there to us now because their places were not fixed by this fantastic project.
But despite this massive
In
injection
fact, we have a Uganda mayor of New York City right now. Not even exaggerating. That's where we're at.
of cash, things were actually getting worse. In fact, from 1970 to 2000, the average income in Africa declined, despite receiving almost 600 billion over this time period. But rather than changing approach, the West doubled down. In 2005, the UN launched the Millennium Development Goals, and the G8 promised to double aid to Africa, with the end of aiming poverty by 2030. This wasn't just a government strategy anymore, it had become a public movement. Campaigns like Comic Relief in the UK, Live Aid, and Band-Aids Feed the World turned Africa into a moral crusade.
Yeah.
Ordinary
True.
citizens were donating millions.
This became like the giant grift of the time. You know, like just give infinite money to Africa. You know? Not even exaggerating. Now, I do have a really hot take. In Niger and Chad and Ethiopia and places like that, the age of marriage for girls is under 15. All right? And that's not even talking about some of the other ones, man. Did you know that 76% of girls in Niger, Chad, Mali, the African Republic, and Guinea get married under 18? 76% of girls. Okay? Like, colonialism did that? Really? Like, we don't need to play this game forever.
Schools held fundraisers, and celebrities sang charity singles, all under the belief that sending
And that's
money.
today. For the record, that's today. That's not back in 1940, all right? That's not in 1826. That's not in the year 600. All right, that's today, for the record.
Would fix the problem. That all created a powerful narrative that poverty in Africa wasn't about politics, corruption, or bad governance. It was simply about a lack of money.
That is such a crazy cope. It's such a wild cope, though. Dude! No, that's a nutty cope, bro. It's not about politics, all right? It's not about the savages, all right? It's not about the low IQ average, all right? You're not allowed to say that because you'll just be called racist. They just don't have money, all right? But how did they get the money? Like how did we get money? How did that happen? We weren't born with infinite money on, I don't know, the northern hemisphere or whatever.
And if we just gave enough of it, we could solve that problem. By 2010, aid flows to Africa had reached over $50 billion a year, the highest level in history. Yet nearly 2 decades later, those efforts have fallen dramatically short. 400 million Africans still live on less than $2 a day, the highest number in history, and the continent's share of global trade remains below 3%, and many countries now are poorer than when they were in the 1980s.
Yeah, how did that happen?
All of
It's
that
obviously
raises the
not
pretty
money.
obvious question. Why did aid manage to kickstart the European economy, but totally fail to do the same in
I love how simple my answer was and how completely correct it is.
Africa? Like always, a range of ideas have been proposed,
All right,
from the
let's hear it.
continent's geography to its colonial history.
Geography and colonial history, bro? What does that even mean? We are too south to actually make money ourselves. No, you're not. What does that even mean? Colonial history? Bro, you were given trillions of dollars All right, America gave Africa over $2.6 trillion. All right, colonial history. This is like saying, well, my grandfather was a slave, so therefore I'm not allowed to get a job. Like, oh my God, dude. I love how no one's even mentioning the idea that maybe the culture is inferior. Yeah, it's totally not the culture that's inferior.
But in the last few years, one school of thought has gained particular attention amongst development experts. Their idea is simple. It can all be explained by something economists refer to as institutions. These are the frameworks that govern societies. Things like the rule of law, property rights, and democracy. And they might be the single most important factor when it comes to explaining why aid might be making things in Africa worse.
Fair, true.
When the Marshall Plan began in Western Europe, Europe had the infrastructure of functioning states. Ministries, legal systems, and public institutions, though damaged, had existed for decades. These institutions provided the framework needed to rebuild.
What inspires the rule of law in different nations, though? Like, obviously, the rule of law in Syria and the rule of law in America operate differently. What possibly could guide the rule of law in these different nations to be so fundamentally different? For example, in Syria, they marry 9-year-olds. In America, well, they don't do that legally. So, I mean, the reality is, it seems like rule of law is not enough. You need a rule of laws to be based on fundamentals that are important. Like, some would argue, rule of law that's based on biblical values, like, you know, America, a Christian nation, actually is just far better than a rule of law based on, let's say, radical Islamic values, like in Syria. Let's say, or just barbarian warlord tribal shit. You know, maybe it is actually the culture that causes the rule of law to be decided, and it's not just the fact that rule of law, period, is enough.
Collect taxes, distribute resources, and enforce laws. All essential functions for a stable and functioning society. But in much of Africa, the picture was very different. Most African states had only recently gained independence, and governments were either newly formed or inherited from colonial administrations. But in both cases, the institutions were generally designed for one purpose: to extract wealth. Unlike most Western democracies, states function...
Back to warlords! The colonialism leaves, they get their independence, and it immediately goes back to give all money to the chief. Isn't that amazing, bro? It literally just reverted back to the cultural roots. And it's like, I can't figure it out. I can't possibly figure out why giving infinite money to the warlord doesn't actually make the cultures better.
Almost entirely to serve the interests of the ruling elite. Indexes tracking the quality of government institutions have consistently found African countries near the bottom of the list. In 2025, African nations made nearly half of the bottom 30 countries on the Polity Democracy ranking. It's not hard to imagine why pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into these states goes wrong. Money that was meant to fund roads, schools, hospitals, electrification often goes straight to the hands of the ruling elites. Presidents who fly private jets to international conferences, or government ministers spotted wearing $60,000 Rolex watches during anti-poverty meetings. Estimates suggest that the continent loses around 30...
This is exactly like the Somalian scammers in America that are all driving like Porsches. They're like on welfare, all right? They can't get a job. They're on welfare, government-funded housing, and they drive a Porsche. It's the same thing, dude. Arafat's wife had a Hermes bag, exactly.
$30 billion every year due to corruption, and 30% of all the aid money it receives. Over the past 50 years, this could amount to hundreds.
It's crazy how this keeps happening, bro. It keeps happening in like all these places. Like the Hamas terrorists, right? The leaders of Hamas are all trillionaires, like billionaires. Well, we're all billionaires. They're all dead now. But they were all billionaires, you know? It's kind of weird how this keeps happening.
Billions of dollars being stolen. But the problem isn't just that this money is effectively being wasted, it also actively supports the very institutions that make development so hard.
That's right. It literally is funneling power to the warlords that'll maintain their powerful infrastructure against the people. Now, if this society would have been allowed to run its course more naturally, the people would eventually overthrow the corrupt warlord. But now, it's not only a corrupt warlord, but it's a corrupt warlord that's also a billionaire. But you're racist if you talk about that.
In a normal democracy, governments are funded through taxes, and that creates a two-way relationship between the state and the people. When the people pay taxes, they expect services in return, and if the ruling class fails to provide this, then they run the risk of people demanding a new government. But in aid-dependent countries, this accountability mechanism is broken. Because governments receive their funding from foreign donors, it doesn't really matter what the people of the country think.
The people are irrelevant.
And so corruption is able to persist with very little domestic resistance.
That's crazy.
This pretty much sums up the continent's political process for the past 50 years. Take Malawi, for example. At various points in the 2000s and early 2010s, foreign aid made up more than 40% of the national budget, but huge amounts of money was being stolen by government officials, paying for things like luxury cars, private homes, or even international shopping trips. You might expect a scandal to spark mass outrage, and after all, the government was siphoning off millions that were meant to serve the public, but that simply never happened, because there was basically no political fallout. As the government's funding came from foreign sources, the people most affected by the mismanagement of public funds, the Malawian citizens, had very little power to demand systemic change. This isn't unique to Malawi. The same dynamic has been occurring across the continent for decades, and it in part explains why the country still has such high levels of corruption. Of course, some level of corruption exists in basically every country, especially during their early development stages. But even under these circumstances, a country can usually still achieve economic development. Small businesses, farmers, and entrepreneurs can drive progress from the ground up, creating jobs and expanding access to goods and services without relying heavily on the state. This is another one of the main problems with aid. It makes ground up work much harder. Because aid makes this route of development far less likely. That's because more often than not, the things being provided by aid organisations are in direct competition with local businesses.
No!
Take the textiles industry.
I didn't even think of that! I didn't even think of that, dude! Bro! Think about it, man. What could the people in Africa do? Alright, they're not developing supercomputers for the most part. Alright, so what could they do? I don't know. They can make bricks. Alright? But what if we give them bricks? We are destroying the job market for bricks. Dude, diabolical.
By the early 2000s, nearly 80% of the clothing sold in some African nations came from abroad. At first, that might seem like a win-win. Clothes were cheap, and aid organisations feel good about reducing waste in Western countries. But the effect on local African industry was devastating.
Dude, empathy is literally not only destroying the West, but it's also destroying Africa too. Like, this hyper-feminized movement in the West, like this feminism empathy push that makes everyone just have infinite empathy for everybody, it's not only destroying us, it's destroying them too. It's just cancer. It's actually just cancer.
In Ghana alone, over 80% of domestic textile factories shut down between 1990 and 2010, which meant thousands of jobs disappearing. And with them, so did the knowledge, machinery, and networks needed to sustain a homegrown industry. In fact, in the last 2 decades, Africa's industrial sector has shrunk from 15% of the continent's economy to now just 10%. This isn't a coincidence. Academic research has found that on average, foreign aid hurts industrialization in Africa. Even the World Bank, one of the biggest aid organizations...
Not trying to be controversial here or anything, but it's almost like, you know, if the kid doesn't figure shit out themselves, they're going to be incapable to do shit for life. Like, you are giving them the crutches and they'll never learn how to walk.
In the world found that periods of increased aid tend to weaken local manufacturing. But it's not just domestic industries that suffer. The entire structure of the economy can be distorted in ways that make economic growth far less likely. To understand why, it helps to look at how countries actually grow rich. In the last few decades, almost every country that has achieved rapid development has done so through an export-led model. Nations like South Korea, Taiwan, and China have all seen huge amounts of economic growth in the past few decades.
Yeah, but that's
and
because
they did this offering low-cost goods that appealed to Western consumers and then selling them on the international markets. Over time, this allowed them to industrialize, build up domestic industries, and eventually move up the value chain. But there is an essential part of the process that people tend to forget: maintaining a weak currency. Doing this makes the country's exports cheaper on the global market and boosting demand from foreign buyers. This increased demand then helps local industries grow, creating jobs and bringing in valuable foreign income, further fueling development. But aid money creates the opposite effect. When money flows into the country, it needs to be converted into the local currency so that governments and aid organisations can actually spend it. But doing this pushes up the price of the currency on foreign exchange markets in response to the higher demand. Having a more valuable currency may not sound like a bad thing, but it actually causes a serious problem. A more expensive currency means that for foreigners trying to buy a country's produce, everything suddenly becomes more expensive.
Obviously.
So people simply stop buying.
Of course, it's inflating the entire economy. Because everything is really supply and demand. But once you have so much more demand, then all the suppliers are going to want more of the demand. You know? They're doing their absolute best here. Like, everyone wants to sell for something that they can use to buy other things. So everything's just going to be driven up in price. If you send in infinite money here, it's just going to completely destroy the economy. Inflation's going to be insane, and there's nothing they can do about it. Because we're jump-starting their inflation because of our empathy.
The produce. For developing economies, this is a total disaster. It means the export-led model that worked so successfully in East Asia becomes impossible to replicate.
Yeah,
in Africa,
it only works in East Asia because in China everything's cheap. So we buy stuff shipped from China for fucking nothing. All right? If we put things there, then it's all going to be so much more expensive and just raise the price of everything.
Today, exports account for about 20% of the average GDP. Less than half of most successful East Asian economies, like Hong Kong, South Korea, or Taiwan. Instead of developing competitive industries and shipping products around the world, aid-dependent countries end up relying on foreign assistance to survive, while their domestic economies remain uncompetitive and underdeveloped.
We are literally teaching... Dude, I'm like, these analogies are just going to sound so racist every time. If you take Hassan Piker's dog, Kaya, all right, who's shocked to stay in place constantly and fed all the food that Kaya would ever need, and you put Kaya into the wilderness, Kaya would not survive. Kaya would not be able to hunt for her own survival, all right? I'm just saying, bro. I'm just saying. We are not giving these people the capability to develop their own economies because their entire economy is reliant on us. And the moment we pull our money back, expect millions of deaths instantly. Not even exaggerating.
Of course, that's not to say there's no good that aid can do. In theory, it has the potential to fill crucial gaps in development, things like building roads, schools, and power grids, all facilitating domestic economic expansion. But that brings us to the final and potentially most serious issue with foreign aid. It almost never effectively delivers. A 2012 report by the Center for Global Development...
Also important to note, it largely doesn't even get to the people. Like, when we saw the Elon Musk Doge thing showing up exactly what was going on with all the U.S. aid, right? A lot of it gets to Democrat-funded, organizations. Then a lot of it just goes to the dictator. And then we get to how the fact that it doesn't even show up because of all the corrupt people in between.
Development found that up to 70% of aid projects either failed to meet their targets or had no measurable impact. In some sectors, the waste was staggering. An audit of health aid in Uganda found that nearly 1/3 of donated medical supplies never reached their intended recipients, lost to theft, mismanagement, or simple logistical failure. In Haiti, after the 2010 earthquake, billions in aid flowed in, yet less than 10% of it reached local institutions.
Oh!
Most was routed through foreign contractors,
What a
NGOs,
nightmare.
or overhead costs. And more than a decade later, many communities still lack basic sanitation or permanent housing.
Oh my God.
To understand why, it's helpful to look at the systems that function effectively.
To understand why, it's helpful to know that the liberal governments have been doing their best to manipulate people into being empathetic so that they could give all their money away and then they just take it on the way and no one will ever know that it all disappears. Sounds like a good plan.
Like a business operating in a competitive market. If it provides a bad product, consumers will simply switch to its competitors, and the firm's revenues drop. And if it doesn't make changes, it may even end up going bankrupt. The point is that people who are providing the product are accountable to the people who end up actually using it.
Look, man, I'm just saying, the Romans, like, almost 2,000 years ago, had running water. Like I'm just saying, I'm just saying it's not just like economics here. Like, economics are a part of it, bro, but they don't have toilets. All right? Like I remember when Mr. Beast built them wells and shit, and like the wells just stopped working. Bro, what the fuck does that mean? The wells stopped working. I'm just like, economically, like, this is a big discussion, obviously, and there's a lot of he's right, but like, it's not just economics, Like, there's something else.
But foreign aid doesn't work that way. If a project fails, the recipients can withhold their taxes or vote for someone else. Because funding comes from foreign governments or donors, there's no mechanism for rewarding success or punishing failure. The result is an enormous lack of incentives to actually do things well.
Why would the NGO give $1 billion to Africa when they could just keep $1 billion and never get punished for it? Completely true. Literally no lies detected.
And the story of foreign aid in Africa is not simply one of failure, but of misplaced assumptions. What began as an effort to lift nations out of poverty has created—
We're turning all of Africa into like the people from Wall-E with iPads. You know? Like, it's so sad, bro. Like, I wish nothing but luck and success for these guys.
Created systems of dependence, weakened institutions, and stifled local industries. That doesn't mean that aid has no role to play. In moments of crisis, like famine, conflict, or natural disasters, it can provide vital short-term relief. But as a long-term development strategy, the evidence is hard to ignore. Aid has not delivered the transformation it's promised.
I love how this dude refuses to acknowledge the fact that aid did transform Europe, though. Aid transformed Europe. Pumping in billions of dollars helped Europe, but it didn't help them. Well, what's the difference? You're glossing over a point here. No, but that was a really good video. I like how he highlighted the economic parts of it and refused to mention the other parts of it that I think are like actually incredibly important and relevant. AIDS transformed Africa. Shut the fuck up, chat. But anyway, thanks so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed. This was an economic breakdown of why giving money to Africa makes it poor, and also a slightly racist socio-political commentary by me, which you should definitely subscribe for. Because over here we do daily videos on lore, all of fiction, all of history, all the lore is here. Islam lore. We're doing all the lores these days. Subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Bye. Like, subscribe, and this video was streamed live on kick.com/Nuxanor. See you there. Stay weird, fam.